Hi, it's Dr. Doug Curtis from Dyslexic and Un-Stoppable. Our mission is to help dyslexics rediscover their inner power. And on today's podcast, we have something a little bit different. We were recently asked to be guests on the We Choose Respect ParentCast with Jed Doherty. We'd love to share that with you. So without further delay, here's the ParentCast.
We choose respect.
Hey, it's so good to see you. My name is Jed, and this is a special edition of the We Choose Respect Worldwide ParentCast. You can find all of our past episodes at WeChooseRespect.com. Today, we have two fantastic guests, Lucie and Doug Curtis. They're here to talk about their fantastic new book called Dyslexic and Un-Stoppable.
Thank you so much for having us.
Yeah, we're very grateful to be here.
Now, I was speaking to Lucie and Douglas before we started recording. Lucie actually has dyslexia, and I don't know if the proper term is suffers from dyslexia, is challenged by dyslexia, has dyslexia, and isn't letting it stop her. What's the proper way to address that?
I usually like to say a label more, because it's not really a diagnosis, because a lot of people say a diagnosis, but if you think about it, you don't take a pill and it resolves. It doesn't resolve. So it's not a medical issue like that. So I like the word labeled.
Labeled dyslexic. Okay. And y'all also, Lucie and Douglas's son, it was labeled with dyslexia and had this challenge in school. First, if you could just talk a little bit about what dyslexia is, because I think a lot of people know that, oh yeah, you kind of reverse your B's and your D's and your P's, but I think it's more than that.
Right, exactly. So it's basically a difficulty decoding words and like assigning the sounds to a word. So they have difficulty realizing that like TH makes a th sound or something like that. So what you'll see is a really smart child who's got tons and tons of ideas. I think of, our son who, when he was 3 or 4, was already drawing engineering books of all these great inventions he was going to make. Mm-hmm. And they have all these great ideas, but as soon as it comes to either writing it down on paper or reading, they struggle with that. It becomes really laborious. They start, acting out or having other issues, just because the difficulty of it.
Now, when you say the example you gave, they have trouble decoding, to connect the TH sound with the,
right.
Isn't that just I imagine someone might be thinking, isn't that just a matter of memorization and learning?
Yeah.
Is there some kind of chemical thing that goes on?
So it's probably the way their brains are wired. They're starting to do more and more research on the brain stuff. I'm a pediatrician, so I have a little bit of the science nerdy background, in addition to our other stuff. But basically what it is your language is on the left side of your brain. That's where your language centers are. And that's the part that helps you to understand words and understand language. And to make reading kind of more natural, it has to kind of cross over to the right side, the more automatic part of your brain. Uh-huh. And kids with dyslexia seem to have difficulty with that crossing over. And that may also be some of the difficulty they have with the reversing of letters, letters looking mirror image. Maybe it's the way the information goes from one side to the other. Mm. Or as Lucie will tell you, also left and right confusion. We'll be driving down the road and she'll say, take a left up here, and I'll take a left, and she goes, no, the other left. So, yeah.
Yeah, well, I can definitely relate to that. And I guess, as you were saying that, you're making that connection, those of us who, are able to look at TH on a piece of paper and just automatically know, it makes this sound, this is what we want to do. I imagine even if you were able to train yourself to always, be conscious of that, it would make reading and writing very difficult if you actually had to think and take a few seconds to think every time you saw TH or whatever letter combinations there are to kind of make those connections with the different sounds.
Yeah. Right. That's why it's like when they're starting to read, they're trying to make those connections. and other kids already make the connection right away. So they're progressing really fast compared to the other ones. So even when they're writing, like our son also has dysgraphia, and he had difficulty with his writing. So even though if you asked him about a story, he would talk and talk and talk. But when he had to write it out, he had to figure out, okay, is the B going to the right, to the left, up or down? So as he was writing the letters, for him, it was taking a long time just to write the letters while his friends were already finished writing their paragraph.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So that's frustration comes in too.
Right.
Yeah. And as you're saying that, I'm thinking to myself that we need to get to a point where we have some empathy for that, for those kids, and to understand that, of course, if your son could just, write it out as quickly as every other kid, he would do it. It's
Exactly.
not
Right.
a matter
And
of
that's where the misunderstanding, sometimes they start calling them names and saying you're slow and things like that, but really it's not that. So if you have to start investigating why is it they're doing that, or when is it that they're struggling, so that you can identify that they're learning differently and has nothing to do with their intelligence.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I think that's one of the things that we're just coming to understand. In even though we have all this, the laws that require schools to provide special education, the schools really aren't equipped to deal properly with kids who think differently.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
A lot of and I have some, I know, my wife is a special needs teacher. It seems like a lot of special needs services are only there, or their primary goal is to work with the kid so that the kid can get to functioning the way everybody else is functioning in the school system, as opposed to just creating a way for this kid to learn the way that they naturally learn.
Exactly. Yeah. We always talk about on our videos and stuff about helping dyslexic kids rediscover their inner power, because it's interesting you say that we're trying to fit them into this left-brained, very methodical way of learning, whereas there's all these other ways that kids learn. Some kids are more visual, some kids are more auditory, some kids are more kinesthetic. They need to move and manipulate things to learn. And we're trying to, fit them all into this one way. And what we try to help people realize is, there are different ways of learning. So, on our website, we have all these tools and strategies for what we call the right brain way of learning, with visual techniques and that kind of stuff that some of them we've adapted from, other sources on the web, and some of them it's what's worked in our lives. Mm-hmm. But we try to do that, but we also like to help parents emphasize their child's strength, right? That even if the child is really struggling in school and very far behind, there's some inner gift that they have, something that they're great at. And if you discover that and then really work hard on bringing that out, a lot of times that'll give them the confidence so that they're willing to then, attack that book that may be a little bit more difficult for them. Yeah.
I feel really bad for kids who, have trouble functioning within this, these very traditional structured learning setting, and they feel like they're failures. The reality is, though, that, this kind of structured learning environment, it hasn't been around forever. And it is unique to, kind of our society and Western society. So it's, it's not necessarily that everybody in history and everybody in the world would learn like this. This is, in comparison to the history of the earth, this is kind of a new phenomenon.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
Well, when a good example is our son, before we realized he was dyslexic, we went to a reading class for non-dyslexics. And it was really just geared on helping him learn the kindergarten curriculum, but it didn't help him learn the way he learned. So there was no improvement, and we spent a couple of months there. And then we ended up in a dyslexic school by default. We didn't even know he was dyslexic then until he got there. And then in 2 months, he went from below kindergarten reading to second grade reading in 2 months because he had the right tools and the right strategies.
Let's talk about some of the things that parents should be aware of. Some of the things that they some clues, some signs that their kids might be learning differently.
Right. I think that we always say you need to connect the dots because there's a lot of like seemingly unrelated things that might happen. So one thing is the first a lot of times they have trouble with rhyming, right? And one of the things they rhyme is like the ABC song. So the average child knows the alphabet, learns it very quickly because of that little song, and that's it. But because it's a rhyme, kids with dyslexia sometimes have trouble with it. Sometimes they're late speakers. In our own situation, I don't know if you can detect it, Lucie's got a bit of a French accent. She's from the French part of Canada. And so we always assume that our son talking a little bit later was because we were trying to teach him 2 languages at the same time.
Right.
But it was after, it was actually when Lucie wrote the book, the first book, and she started to go back into all of her like kindergarten and all the way through high school report cards and then to our son's report cards and everything like that we started to see these things, right? So
tying shoes.
Yeah. So another one is exactly tying shoes. That might have to do with some of it's fine motor problems, but some of it also might be the crossing over from one side of the body to the other, the connection in the 2 parts of the brain. So yeah, speech, tying shoes, buttons, what else did we see in our son?
Well, he was one of the things that was interesting was the early or late crawler, right? So he was 5 months old. I'm at a play date and everybody's sitting there. The kids are not moving and he's gone. He's climbing everywhere. But you don't realize that until somebody comes and tells you that it could be part of it, you're not connecting the dots. So all these little things, like I see a lot of the parents who their children are in all different kinds of classes at school. They get a little bit of speech, a little bit of math, a little bit of writing, all these little things, but they're not associating them together. They think, they just need a little help. Well, those things often are connected. So, like, the speech was a big one for our son.
Yeah, exactly. He struggled with a lisp, and it took a long time for him to get some help with that. And I have actually a funny little anecdote about that. Because of all the the stuff that we've gone through and the research that we've done helping our son and everything like that, and then writing the books, we discovered some quick and easy screening techniques. So a lot of times if I have a patient in my office and the parents are talking about difficulty reading, maybe some behavioral issues or attention issues or whatever, I'll do some of those screening tests. And I can remember this one girl, and we were going through the whole thing, and certainly some of her screening tests looked like dyslexia. Now, it was not a diagnostic test. They need to go to see a psychologist to get the full evaluation, but it really looked like it. And then, after the whole physical was all done, the mom said, okay, it's time to go, get your shoes on. And out of the corner of my eyes, I'm talking to the mom. I look over at the child, and sure enough, here she is at like 7 or 8 tying her shoes with the bunny ears, because the whole thing of tying shoes is one thing that kids with dyslexia struggle with. I just thought, I think it's interesting that if a lot of times it's in retrospect after they've, struggled for a while and you finally get them identified, that you go back and you realize, what, there were all these clues along the way.
Yeah. One of the things I hope we're starting to do, is to, instead of immediately labeling a kid a problem or a behavior issue or dumb, which is even more horrible, if we start, like you said, start connecting the dots and thinking, wow, maybe this is in that together, let us know that there's an issue here, that a way that it's telling us that we need to get our kids some help.
Right, exactly. And you also bring up another issue that's a big part of our mission, which is, when parents, and it doesn't have to be something as harsh as dumb, right? When parents just say something like, oh, well, you're just not that good a speller or something like that. That's another big part of our mission, is helping parents realize what we call the power of words. That, the words that we use are powerful, and they can define a child, and that, we need to use words that lift them up, rather than these words that squish them down. Because, I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about the documentary, but we interviewed a couple of people for a documentary that we're trying to put together, and it was amazing. I mean, you want to talk about Flint Sprague?
Sure. We had like Emmy Award winners for documentaries who you ask them questions that bring them back in their, early elementary school years, and they're in tears remembering what people said about them because it affected them so much, and it took them a long time to remove that barrier that they thought, oh my gosh, I'm dumb. And actually, I'm not dumb. I'm really smart. I just struggle and I learn differently. But there's so many times that dyslexia, a lot of times it's not the teacher's fault because they're not even trained to recognize it. I know many of my friends are teachers and they don't even know what dyslexia looks like. So they're not even trained. And I'm like, they're like, oh, we never had one in our class. I'm like, my friend, you have probably 1, 2, 3, 4 in your class every year, and you don't recognize it, because you're not aware of the symptoms and connecting those dots like we talk about a lot. So then these kids are put in a category, the 5% that are struggling, and, they say, well, we can't help them. And well, yes, you can. You have to help them in a different way. And then they become thinking that they're not smart, and it affects their whole life. Their whole journey in life can go totally different than what they would be able to do in their life because they think that somebody said you're dumb when you're not.
Right. Yeah, and one of, just to kind of take up for the teachers, they're in a tough spot because they have so much pressure in there. They don't have, especially in the public school systems, they don't have a lot of leeway to adapt. They're given a curriculum and they're said, this is what you have to teach and this is the way you teach it. And it's very difficult for them to kind of adapt it. Even if they had a whole classroom of kids who learn in a particular way, if the curriculum said do it that other way, then they're kind of stuck.
Exactly. That's why we say, because we know it's like we've had our kids in public school and they're in private school now, but you have 30 kids. You don't have time to figure out, if there's one that's quiet in the background and it, you're like, okay, one is quiet. I have to deal with this one. You have to manage your whole day. And I understand that. But what we're trying to do is teach the teachers to recognize what dyslexia looks like and tell the parents, listen, you need to go and look into this, right? Not have necessarily a teacher, because it's your child. You need to take responsibility for your child. I always say, I'm the mom. I need to help my child, whatever it is. And I've always done that. But I also want the teachers to recognize like when we were going through this whole journey, I would bring up things like they would say, well, it's this. And I'd say, well, are you sure? Because let's talk about, they would say it's a behavioral issue, right? Well, is fidgety. Why is he fidgety? Is he fidgety when he's sitting at home doing Legos, or is he fidgety when it's reading time? When is the behavior showing up? So there's all these clues. And then at the same time, we're trying to be positive advocates for our kids so that we can work in collaboration. Our son succeeded. He's doing amazing in school right now, top of his class, because we did collaborations with the teachers and this reading specialist and all this so that we can work together. I had to do my part. Our son had to do his part. Everybody had to work together so that, there's no blame game, right? Everybody, how can we help this child succeed?
Yeah. I mean, I think that's a big thing that we always come from the point that everybody involved, the parent, the teacher, the administrators, the special ed teacher, they all want the best for the kids. They're all doing the best they can with what they've got at the time. But you're right. They're overworked. And then of course, if there is that dyslexic child that withdraws a little bit and sits in the corner, they're like, well, at least he's quiet and seems to be okay. Let me deal with this one over here who's got the more behavioral issue or whatever. So.
Right. Yeah, that was, I want you, now that we have kind of identified what things to look for, what do we need to do as parents to help our kids? And I think you both stated the most important thing, which is to work in collaboration with the school, with the teachers, with the therapists, with the specialists. My wife tells me so many stories of, you can kind of understand it, but it's not helpful. Parents coming in and their fists are up.
Yes.
Ready for a fight, walking through the door into the meeting. And it's like, wow, why in the world do you think we want your kid to fail? It's it's not in anybody's best interest for your kid to fail, to do anything to set your kid off. We all want the best for your kid. That's why we're dedicating our life to these kids. So how do we advocate? What's the first steps for parents? So they've gone home, their kid's not doing great in school. He or she's they're not a behavior problem. So, they're not, the teacher's not pulling their hair out. So they're not getting calls every night, but your kid can do better, and you've seen these different things. What's the next step?
Well, one thing that we do actually is at the beginning of each year, it was more again in the early years when our son was struggling. We actually had the first few years him actually write a letter to the teacher, kind of explaining, I love learning. And that's the other thing that I think that we helped him with is, yes, he rose to the top of his class, but he has this amazing love of learning that's the thing that I think that parents really need to work on. Keep that love of learning alive, right? But he write them a letter and just say, look, I'm, I love learning. I love my teachers. I love school. And, I still am working on the reading. And, sometimes it may seem like I'm either not paying attention or I'm not, I'm not doing the work, but really I'm trying as hard as I can. And it helps the teacher right from the beginning understand that, this child's helping, this child's really working hard. So it kind of sets the tone right there. Then another thing that we've done is, when we go into parent-teacher conferences, you just go in with the attitude that, okay, I want the absolute best for my child, but the teacher does too. The administrators do too. The special education teacher does too. So you go in and you say, look, here's what I'm willing to work with and do outside of the school system or whatever. How can you help me? And if you're working like that, like how can you help us? I think it kind of brings in everybody's feeling of this is my area of expertise. This is how I can help.
I love that. I love going in there and just starting off with the conversation. How can I help? How can we work together to help our kid?
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Because that's what we're all trying to do, right? We all want our kids to succeed and do the amazing things that they're capable of. So.
Well, we do, and but I think sometimes, we talk about parents who, kind of live vicariously through their kids and push them into sports and push them into the arts and dance and singing, and it's like, oh, my kid's going to be a star, and I'm going to kind of, and I think the opposite happens too. Sometimes when our kids are struggling, sometimes parents are like, I don't want that light shined on me. I don't, I want to kind of deny that my kid's having trouble because I don't want anybody to think I'm a bad parent or, I'm doing something wrong.
That's a big one, yeah.
Yeah. And how can, what advice can you give to parents who might be feeling a little bit like that?
I would say, like sometimes first of all, I always say you have to go with your gut instinct, right? If you know your child, like we knew that something was, we always knew he was very, very smart and creative and things like that, but we knew there was something off, right? So first you acknowledge that, like it's hard, even for us, it was hard, you're in denial, right? That first part, you're like, you can be, I am a pediatric nurse, I write books, my husband's a pediatrician, we're like, okay, no, nothing is happening, everything is perfect, right? You have the pressure of all the people around you that they're doing 5 million things and your child is there, can't read a little book. You're like, okay, this is not happening to me. So first of all, you have to try to put yourself outside of the equations. It's not about you, it's about your child, right? So try less competing with the neighbors and say, okay, what is going on and how can I help my child? And then you can say, well, okay, what is it that my child is really, really good at? Because if the self-esteem part of the child is so important. So if we can, there was all these struggles, reading, writing, math, all these things show up. And then you're like, okay, in the meantime, while my son is working after school for hours, in the summer for hours and hours and hours, working on learning to overcome dyslexia. What is it that I can help him with his self-esteem to keep it up and make him realize that I recognize that he's working hard and that he's doing himself a favor, right? He's the one who has to do the work, right? Mm-hmm. But in the meantime, I need to put my, like dyslexia, the word dyslexia. People like just the energy that can be around it, right? If you show that energy to your child, then your child thinks, well, there's something wrong with me, right? So if you can address a learning issue in a different way and say, okay, we're going to put some system in place to help you with these things. You are smart. It's just you learn differently. It's just a way we keep saying a power of words. It always comes back to the power of words for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Actually, it's funny because when our son was finally evaluated by the psychologist, his main fear was he was going to be found out not to have dyslexia and just to be normal, right? Uh-huh. Because we had let him know that, this was this amazing gift that he had, that there was something in him that gave him this creative, kind of sideways thinking, brain that sees the world in a different way that eventually will lead him to do great things.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I think that's such a beautiful message to give to kids, because that's one of the things that history has shown, is that there are all sorts of folks who carry the label of dyslexic or ADHD or a myriad of other labels, who've gone on to do amazing, incredible things.
For sure.
Absolutely. Well, Doug and Lucie, I want to thank you so much for creating this book, Dyslexic and Un-Stoppable, how dyslexia helps us create the life of our dreams and how you can do it too. If folks want to connect with you, is there a website for them to do that at?
Yes, it's dyslexicandunstoppable.com. So all one word, Dyslexic and Unstoppable.
Dyslexic and Unstoppable.
And we have a Facebook fan page, and we're on YouTube. If you just search Lucie or Doug Curtis, we're both on there. On our YouTube channels, we put out videos a couple times a week. All the stuff that we've learned kind of along the way. Every time challenges come up in our life and we found a way to work around it or overcome it, that's what we try to give to parents. So
that's fantastic. I think this is a great resource for parents who are out there. Just to know that there are people out there who've kind of already gone through the struggle and have discovered ways to help their kids really thrive and be happy.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Exactly. Yes.
Well, Douglas and Lucie, did I say it right that time?
Yes.
That was actually very good.
Well, Douglas and Lucie Curtis, thank you so much for being part of the We Choose Respect ParentCast.
Well, thank you for having us.
You can find all of the current and past episodes of the We Choose Respect ParentCast at our website, WeChooseRespect.com.